Thanks for listening to Exploring the Wine Glass podcast, the podcast for people who love wine. I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass. Today on Exploring the Wine Glass, we are talking Franciacorta. Before we begin, we have one thing that we have to get out of the way. It's not champagne. In order to be legally called champagne, the sparkling wine must come from the Champagne region of France. Now that we have that over with, let's talk Franciacorta. Everyone has heard the statement, location, location, location. Well, Franciacorta has it all. Located in the Lombardy region of northern Italy, within the Brescia province, the region is nestled at the foothills of the Alps. You can find Lake Iseo to the south of the region. It stretches in a near perfect square for about 15 miles through the Oglio River. In these flatlands, you can find both magnificent vineyards and olive groves. I was invited to New York City to taste through some delicious Franciacorta wines. These wines are well worth your effort to seek them out. Trust me. I hope you enjoy the conversation. If you would like to read more about Franciacorta, please read my blog. You can find the post at bit.ly Franciacorta NYC. Plancha.
Welcome back. I know some of you were in the seminar this morning, so right off the bat, I'll apologize. Some of the information might be a little bit redundant, but only in the first 10 minutes, and then I'm going to throw it over to these people who are way more interesting than I am. But just to kick us off, we're going to have Mr. Silvano Brescianini, who is the president of the Consorzio, and also the executive vice president of Barone Pezzini, one of the iconic wineries of the region, to just share a few words, and then we will take over and we'll go back listening.
Super quick, buongiorno, welcome, thank you for coming in this Franciacorta Day. I'm sure you will enjoy this super important seminar, and grazie again, and we'll see you next in Franciacorta. Thank you, buon lavoro.
Thank you, that was very brief. So today this afternoon we're going to have, it's going to be more of a discussion. I'm just going to kick it off with a little bit of market data because charts are fascinating. No, you're supposed to laugh now. Anyway, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. I'll give you their experience. They joined me on a trip to the region in March, and it was a really wonderful time, and I think for all of you, it was the first time you're there? Yeah, so I really wanted them to share their experience of the region and their experience of the wines as opposed to just my experience. So I'll be really turning it over to them. But as I kind of mentioned again in my earlier seminar, this Franciacorta, and we're sort of talking about this just now, it's in terms of a wine region, it's quite young. If we really kind of dated back to when the modern day, the wines that you're tasting today that are labeled Franciacorta, we're talking about a wine that was first reintroduced really in 1961. And that was through the first commercially produced sparkling wine that was created by the winery BERLUCCHI, which is why one of their wines is called 61. And it was a wine that was really made by their winemaker, who was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ziliani, and he had visited Champagne and really loved the wines of Champagne, and he came back to the region of Franciacorta with a passion to create a wine that was sparkling and sort of in the spirit of the wines of Champagne, but very much expressing the terroir of the region that they were in. And he experimented for several years. He will say the first couple of wines he made were really not very good. But then in 1961, he released his first wine. It was made 100% from Pinot Bianco, and it was a sparkling wine, and it became quite successful. And we can sort of really talk about this being the starting of the modern era of Franciacorta wine. So fast forward, the DOC was established. in 67, I believe, and then they became a DOCG in 95, and then in 97 the first wines were released as DOCG. So they were the first region in Italy to gain a DOCG for wines that were sparkling and made only in the traditional method. So that's a very key part of the quality of the wines that you're tasting. Again, I sort of reference other sparkling wines. Just to kind of give you, again, I put those numbers before, but for me it's always really striking because when we talk about where does Franciacorta sit, it's not a region that's making vast volumes of wine, and they are not looking for vast market domination. It is very much a small, unique, niche, high quality wine region. It is not a very big wine region. Again, we're sort of talking about that today. And Carrie was saying, like, what really struck her was kind of how small the region is. And it's true that it's unified not only in its size, but also in the mentality of the winemakers. I would say, to me, uniquely, this is one of the only regions I know of in Italy where 98% of the producers in the region are members of the consortium. That is highly relevant because when you're a member of the consortium, it means that you're all steering the ship in one direction. You all have the same vested interest in mind. You're all trying to establish a certain quality parameters for your category, for your wine region, and for your wines. So when the consortium it has a 98% membership, that's really impressive because it means everybody's working towards a unified goal. So that's something that really strikes me. But within that, it's important to also understand we are still talking about a region that is producing $20 million a year and really selling 17 million. The rest are kind of in reserve. So, and again, I made this reference earlier, but to just sort of put it in this wine that's often compared against, which is Champagne, 360 million bottles of wine are produced in the Champagne region every year. The big producers in Champagne, if we're talking about Moët & Chandon, are producing almost 30 million bottles. So one winery is producing more than the entire region, double almost the entire region of Franciacorta. Okay? So again, the only reason I say this is just to say it's not a volume. There are no bad wines being made in Franciacorta. You might like some wines more than others. You might like a certain style more than another. So the other thing that's really special is in this small region with fairly small production, you have a very high percentage of estate production. So you have about 90% of wines that are produced in the region are produced as single estate wines. Now it doesn't mean they're single vineyard wines. And that's not really something that's part of the rubric of the area. Most of the producers have vineyards, and this is a map of the region just to give you a sense of the topography. And the different colors that you're seeing here refer to the different soil types and climatic conditions. So the reason that we sort of refer to this is this was a study that was done to really talk about the 6 different soils that they have in the region. The reason I'm mentioning this is to say that there are very, very few who are actually making all of their single wines from single regions. What you will more likely find is that most of them have vineyards in at least 4 of these 6 soil types and climatic regions, and they're blending. Okay, so even there are estate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the vineyards are surrounding the property. Oftentimes, their vineyards are spread out over these different areas. So whether you're up here, in this area here, you can see it's a little bit more mountainous. This tends to be a cooler zone. If you're further down here towards Monte Orfano, this is sort of the southern perimeter of the region. That tends to be the warmest pocket. It's also the area that tends to be the earliest to be harvested. So you do have quite a difference. You have areas that are closer here that are more impacted by the lake influence. And then the different colors really referring to the different soils. So as I mentioned earlier, this was an area, the Lake Iseo, is one of a handful of lakes in northern Italy that were all formed by the movement of glaciers. So when you have these glacier movements, they dig very deep troughs in the earth. So you have very, very deep lakes. And then they also cause a lot of upheaval in the surrounding areas. They pick up a lot of rocks in their path. And so you have a lot of rocky presence, a lot of rocks in these different vineyards, and that's part of what really differentiates some of these different zones. Okay, so but to say that most of the wineries have vineyards in several of these zones, and oftentimes they are blending. So it is not typically an area where you're going to find single cru or single vineyard wines. It's not part of the regulation. It's not part of the DOCG. Okay. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it is not a big producing wine region, but it is a quality producing wine region that's been very mindful and very careful in how they've been growing their production. Everything has really been done with a tremendous focus on quality. And the numbers really prove that trajectory. It is growing, a nice and steady growth, which is great. It's also the exports have been growing. However, very small, right? So it's still, we're at 11% now. Then the trajectory is moving in the direction that we wanted, but it's still a very small player on the export market. Okay, so only 11% is exported. And of that, Switzerland and Japan get the lion's share of what's exported. So the US is important. It's been growing as a market share, but again, we're not the biggest importer of Franciacorta, but it is certainly, again, moving in the right direction. It's gaining more presence in our market. Again, just to sort of take a step back and just in terms of the grape varieties that are planted in the region, it is vastly dominated by Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the most important grape variety in the region. And what I'd like to point out is it's not a recent addition. It's not just been brought into the vineyards recently. It's been in the vineyard region since the mid-1800s. So Chardonnay is not an indigenous grape variety to northern Italy, but it has been there long enough that it's almost a traditional grape variety of northern Italy. Not just in Lombardy, but you see it in Piedmont, you see it in Alto Adige, you see it in Trentino. So it has had enough presence in that region. Pinot Nero plays an important role. It often will be part of a blend, but also when it comes to rosés, obviously it will play a very important role. Rosés can be 100% Pinot Nero, or they can have a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Nero. And finally, Pinot Bianco. Pinot Bianco was maybe a little bit more present historically. Today, it's a much smaller player, and you really find it's maybe one of the things that I find really divides the house styles. You have some producers that really love their Pinot Bianco and put a fair amount of it in their blends, and some wineries that just don't think it works for their style. So I'll give you the information as we taste some wines. The focus of this is not so much on the tasting as much as on the discussion. But what I would like to mention is also a new grape variety, and for the people that were in the earlier seminar, you had a chance to taste a wine that had a little bit of Erba Mate in the blend. So Erba Mate is a grape variety that is actually indigenous to the region. It was identified many years ago in a study that was done by the University of Milan, and it sort of stayed in the back research rooms until more recently some producers with an awareness to climate change and the impact that it's having on their harvest dates, moving up and up a little bit every year, have been looking to find grape varieties that would help that, especially when it comes to the acidity, the maintaining more acidity in their wines. So one of the true characteristics of Erba Mate is it is very high in acidity, very, very late ripening. So I kind of said, oh, maybe a month, later, and Mr. Bresciani was saying it's more like 2 months later. So if your harvest traditionally begins in August, September, you're harvesting Erba Mate in October. So that's one of the characteristics that they really value. It is not an aromatic grape. It's not a grape that's going to give you a lot of weight, but it is a grape that's going to give you a lot of natural acidity. I kind of think of it as like your lemon squeeze on a salad. So, and that's the true value of it. So Erba Mate is something that was recently written into the regulation. Again, with a very thoughtful approach, they really wanted to make sure that it has the potential to do what they wanted to do. They wanted to do some tests to see how it ages before they allow it into the regulation to be used. So in the most recent revision of the DOCG regulation, they now allow the use of the Erba Mate, but to a maximum of 10%. And even then, it is limited in what you can use it for, which is usually your brut non-vintage. You cannot use it in the Nestled, okay, which is one of the trademark categories. We're not tasting one here, but please make sure you taste some outside. Satin is a really beautiful category that they make only in Franciacorta, and it's really defined by having less pressure in the bottle. So for a Satin, it has to have a maximum of 5 atmospheres of pressure in a bottle versus 6, which is your traditional sparkling wine. Okay, so make sure that you talk to the producers out there. But Satin will never have herba mate in it. Okay. And then a couple of other things is just to talk about the aging. You know, one of the things again about the Franciacorta in general, they really have gone the extra mile, if you will, in terms of making sure that the wines are not being pushed out to market. So unlike a Cava or a Cremant, where they're aging for 9 months, and Champagne, which is aging for 15, for a Brut non-vintage, the minimum aging would be 18 months on the lease, and with another regulation of when you may actually release the wines. And then for the Satins and Rosé, it's 24 months on the lease. And then for the vintage, it's 30 months on the lease. And then the reserves, it's 60 months on the lease. And some years, if they're not considered good enough, the consortium, you cannot make a single vintage, or you cannot make a reserve. So again, this sort of real feeling of everybody working to the same goal, which is if it's not a good vintage, and they've had a lot of variation in vintages, that you don't put out a reserve, okay, because it doesn't benefit anybody. And then in terms of the market share, Brut is the significant percentage of wine that is produced there, but Satin is actually quite an important category. Honestly, I find, and a part of the discussion with ourselves today will be that, but you know, how do you introduce Franciacorta? Because the reality is most people don't know Franciacorta, let's be, you know, to be truthful. Satin is a great, I kind of call it my gateway drug. It's a great way to get people introduced to the category because it offers both something unique to talk about, but also offers something unique in a wine, which is a lower pressure, a little bit more accessible for some people who maybe are not devoted sparkling wine drinkers. The lower pressure gives it a more accessible, kind of an easier entry to that category. And then rosés, we'll taste 2 rosés today. I find them to be particularly lovely, actually, from that region. Typically more fruity, kind of riper red fruit, a lot more of a red fruit character usually comes through on the rosés of Franciacorta. So again, something to kind of keep in mind. So we're going to pour the wines in a little bit because I wanted to have them be you know, nice and fresh for you. And what I would like to do now is kind of turn it over to my panelists. We have Carrie Levens, and they're going to talk about themselves. You know, they can do a better job. Jonathan Lopez and Ryan Mana. So Carrie, ladies first. Go ahead.
Thank you, May. I'm Carrie, and I was most recently the general manager and wine director at Chef's Club in the Top Building in Soho, although I've been a som in New York for many years. Yeah, this was my first visit to Franciacorta. It was very happy. That I've been a som in New York for maybe 15 years, and most recently the beverage director and general manager at Chef's Club. In the Puck building where we had a rotation of visiting chefs. While I was there for 4.5 years, I worked with 140 chefs, pairing wines to their menus from all over the world. So that was one of the most fascinating things about Franciacorta for me, which I think we'll talk about.
Currently, I am the general manager and beverage director at a restaurant on the west side called the Milling Room. We're a seasonal restaurant, pretty large. And passed my advanced sommelier last year, and I actually worked under Carrie for a couple of years at Chef's Club as well. So we also know each other pretty well. She's famous around these parts. That's it.
Okay. And last but not least,
my name is Ryan Mana. I am the wine director of Osteria Marini in Soho, a couple blocks south of Chef's Club, actually. We are a restaurant that focuses on the cuisine of central Italy, specifically Emilia-Romagna, which has a long heritage of sparkling wines, sparkling Lambruscos and such, and our wine list is dedicated entirely to wines of Italy, with the exception of Champagne, which we have a small amount of, and of which our sparkling Italians outnumber our Champagne still. So it's our focus has always been to maintain exploration into the wines of Italy, and this was a great opportunity for me because I had been to Italy a number of times, but I had not traveled to Franciacorta, and going into it, I had known a few of the wines and had experience with a few of the wines, but I definitely was very impressed. Just to start things off, I was very impressed with what I saw over there, both in terms of quality and just the experience of wine
Thank you. So yes, as I mentioned, we were together on a trip in March, and they worked really hard. We made sure so that I really want them to get an experience not just of the wines but of the region, of what is special about this. And for me, a big part of what is special about this region, not only because of what it brings visually, but also climatically and for all the other reasons, the lake. And I said, we really need to do a trip on the lake. And we were lucky enough that we didn't have rain that day, and we got to enjoy a trip on the lake, and then we got to go eat at a restaurant on the lake. So one of the things about Lake Iseo is it has a very big island that's inhabited, and there are a bunch of restaurants there. And they eat a lot of lake fish. So that was our running joke. We're like, what is lake fish? Well, we got to have a whole lunch of all these different kinds of fish that I had never had in my life. That were mostly all from Lake Iseo. So it was kind of important to also realize that, and we were talking a little bit before about the climate, but I wanted you to kind of see here, and part of the reason I actually wanted this picture is to see not only do you have a lake that's not very big, but it's very, very deep, but you also have all these pre-Alps surrounding it, which means that you always have a fair amount of wind factors kind of coming through, and that's a big part of what pushes through frost and all these other kinds of issues that you may have in the vineyard. So I just kind of wanted to put that up there. The other reason I was very excited about this panel is because, as they told you, they come from very different restaurants. So I've always felt, and part of the challenge is that when people taste Franciacorta, they love it. Most people agree that the quality is high, which Ryan just said, yet somehow it's not getting the traction on lists that we would like it to get, even though the growth is going in the right direction. And so what I wanted was not just to sort of focus on somebody who works in an Italian restaurant, because obviously and absolutely that is a very important client, but also, can it play outside of that playing field? Can it play in places that are not just Italian focused and that have a more holistic approach? So a place like the Milling Room, which is, American, local, seasonal food, and, does Franciacorta have a place on that list? And I think the answer was yes, right? And with your experience of all these kind of rotating chefs, one of the conversations we had was, Carrie was like, God, I'm realizing as we're visiting all these different wineries, and she's like, how many she had actually worked with. So I'll kind of turn it back to my panel and say, in terms of your experience, I'm going to start with Carrie. In terms of your experience with what you expected about the region, because you hadn't visited it, how did the visit change your perception? Or what was kind of surprising about what you found out?
Well, first, I was struck by there were a few things actually, in general. How small the region was. Because I had already tasted a lot of wines from Franciacorta, in my mind I thought it was a much bigger region that covered more area. But to go from one corner to the other takes about 30 minutes by car. And it just seemed really compact. Another thing, as you're talking, the saying comes to mind, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. that growing wines organically, and how many of them were thought it was important enough to pursue a certification in organic viticulture. So I think we all thought that was both important and impressive. And then the other thing that you said that I thought was kind of really summed everything up for me is that it's a small, unique, high quality, niche region. And I actually think that this incremental slow growth is really, really great and important. And I think it will continue as more people are drinking sparkling wine. A lot of people are really familiar with Prosecco as the biggest sparkling wine in Italy, and there's a lower price point to Prosecco. And as a buyer, I would often grapple with, okay, I need to make money on wine, I have to make sure that my program is producing financially, do these wines make sense right now? And I would always just go by what's in the glass, and is it really good? Does it have is it high quality? Is the price appropriate to what's in the glass? And never really like, oh, well, it's Italian food, so I have to have Italian wine. It's always, what's important in the glass. And sometimes with Franciacorta, I found that the price points were a little high with what I needed to charge. When someone's like, oh, I wanted to tell winemakers for Prosecco. But again, what I feel like I've learned by visiting the region is that the controls and the rules are even a little bit more stringent than Champagne. And what you are really paying for is a lot of painstaking process, and you really are paying for quality in the glass. And coming away from the trip, I kind of felt like someone was asking me if they were going into a wine store and they just wanted to grab a sparkling wine off the shelf and just buy it with confidence without having tasted it. I think that you have a really good chance of just picking any Franciacorta off the shelf and getting something really delicious and really high quality, and just kind of choosing it blindly, because there is so much buy-in to wines of quality that they don't really waver. So there were definitely a lot of different styles, there was a lot of different personality, and different takes on just wine style in general, but across the board you can say that the most consistent thing was the very high quality of all the wineries that we visited and all their wines we tasted. Any thoughts?
Yeah, continuing on board with what Carrie was saying, it's really impressive to see any consortio, any group so cohesive. It speaks volumes to the approach that they have, the concepts, the philosophies that they have. You have a large contingent of producers who are all sort of working towards the same things, and this is not. This is a little bit of. This is kind of rare. This isn't. You would think this would be the norm for other regions throughout Italy, but it's not always the case. There's regions that are producing a lot of bulk wine and also producing more artistic wine, and there's always divisions between those. And Franciacorta has a little bit of this going on as well. You have producers who are producing a couple million bottles a year. You have producers producing tens of thousands of bottles a year, and yet there isn't this political or philosophical divide between them. They are all feeling that they are of Franciacorta first, and then they're doing their own thing within it second. And it's really it's not something that you see everywhere, and it's really important. The one thing that struck me is the second Champagne method region that I visited, and Franciacorta, like you said, the aging process is so long, and sometimes when we're thinking about what it costs, we often just think, what does it cost, and we're thinking about the raw material or the ingredients involved. We're not thinking about everything that got it to where it is. And when you walk into, when you're considering Franciacorta producers, you have to consider that in some cases they're sitting on 5-6 years worth of stock. And if you're producing 500,000 bottles a year, you quickly find yourself in a need to hold millions of bottles just to function. And that's a predicament that you don't find yourself in if you were making Chianti and Brunello necessarily, like by law. And so it requires a lot of investment, but a lot of infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure, storage. A lot of time, a lot of storage,
and time
temperature
is the most
controlling.
expensive ingredient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And labor and everything else, and then the quality control on all of this becomes a real key issue. And so when we're in Franciacorta and we're drinking very consistent wines, we're looking at the end product of something that we're now considering all of these factors. I think it's something that, hopefully you guys as consumers of this particular product will also value, because it does take a lot in order to get it. And we may touch on this. This is in Champagne. You're doing this. When we were tasting Franciacorta, I sort of thought of it as a bell curve. You're always got like a bell curve, and you've got this extraordinary wine on one side, and you've kind of got a couple duds on the other side, and most of it is going to really be in the middle. And I really felt like with Franciacorta, cut the tail end off. Not to say that they're not extraordinary on the high side, but the positive is that there was almost no duds the entire time you were there, and that it's kind of odd. It was odd. I think it is a very quality product because of this, and if it's a few more dollars on the shelf than maybe Prosecco or maybe something else, I think it's worth the chance on it in that regard. That was one of the big takeaways that I had for someone who drinks all these things. I drink champagne, I drink all the sparkling wines of it, and I do drink Franciacorta, so that was where I sort of settled on that experience for myself.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that Dracaena Wines now has a wine club? We named it the Chalk Club. Draco is on our label, but Vegas was getting a little jealous, so we decided he deserved to be our club spokesdog. In Las Vegas, betting chalk means that you are betting on all of the favorites. We are betting that we are one of your favorite wineries, so we thought the name was apropos. The club is simple, yet a bit different than most. When you wager on us, we will ship you 3 bottles of wine twice a year, once in April and once in September. You can choose all red or mix of red and rosé. You immediately receive 15% off of all your wine purchases throughout the year, but what makes our club stand out is the progressive discount. Let your club membership ride into the next year. Your discount increases. Each year you parlay your membership, you receive an additional 5% off up to a planned maximum of 25%. Your club shipments are discounted to a flat $15, plus we'll cover your club shipping cost for your second shipment. That's $15 house money in a sure bet for you. So please head to our website, dracenawines.com, and find out all of the benefits of joining the Chalk Club and how to sign up. We've stacked the odds so that you can get our award-winning wines without breaking the bank.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, and I appreciate that, because I feel like it's, and I said this before, I mean, champagne there are some outstanding champagnes, but really there are some really, really awful ones out there as well. There are ones that are barely making the minimum aging, that are really high in acidity because the wines are severely underripe and they're getting very adjusted by dosage. So there's a lot of that going on, and it's not to say that, again, and there are extreme, amazing wines made in Champagne, but there's also a lot of not so great wines. And I did find that, in Franciacorta we don't have this, you don't have these kind of bottom tier wines. We're starting at a much higher level, and there's a lot more cohesion in the expression of the wines, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that you do have a lot of buying from the producers into the consortio. The minimum regulations are quite stringent in terms of everything, in terms of the planting densities, in terms of the amount of percentage of juice you can use, in terms of the minimum aging, and all of that is really regulated. And so, cohesively, you do end up with a product that's quite a bit higher. And yes, it is reflected in a slightly higher price point. Part of the reason we're sort of harping on this, maybe a little bit, is because, you know, again, it's sort of, you always get thrown into, so Italian wine Prosecco, you know, and why should I spend more? And you're like, they're so not the same. In no way, shape, or form are these two wines similar, except for they're both from Italy. And that's where the differences end. If you're making a Prosecco, first of all, the region's much bigger, recently expanded even more. You're making it from a grape variety that's pretty generous in terms of its production. You're fermenting in tank. Your second fermentation's in tank. You chill, you filter, you bottle, you ship it out to market within a month, and you can sell it for $10. But when you're making Franciacorta, you are doing a second fermentation in bottle. You're waiting a minimum of 18 months, and most of them are exceeding that. And that's just for your entry level. And so, you know, and 65%, if not more, are working organically. So it's a completely different landscape. And so, yes, does that cost more money in the end? Yes, it should cost more money, right? And so there's a reason why these bottles are more expensive, but the quality is there to support the price. So with that said, let's start tasting maybe a little bit and talk about the wines. I always find tasting is kind of a nice support to what we're discussing, and we'll continue our conversation. So go ahead, everybody, and taste that first wine, because, all right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit. As I was telling people before, I'm not somebody who tells you what you're smelling and tasting. That's your thing. But I will tell you some information about that wine in case you wanted to know. So it is, let's see, what do we know about this wine? It is a blend of 70% Chardonnay and 30% Pinot Noir, or Pinot Nero. And it is vinified in stainless steel and part in wood. So again, this is kind of something I talked about in my first seminar. There's a lot of that going on. A lot of them are fermenting. A majority in stainless steel, and then doing a small portion in oak, and usually that is for the Chardonnay. So this is a brut. But the residual, or the RS on this one is 4 grams per liter. And this is another one of the things that I kind of mentioned earlier, that even though a brut category, you can go up to, legally, you can go from 0 to 12 grams per liter. In general, Franciacorta bruts are drier than Champagne bruts. In general, you will find that you're about 4.5 to max 6, whereas I would say in Champagne, we're more like 7, 8, 9, depending on the vintage. So they will typically be drier. You have nice acidity. Oftentimes now malolactic fermentation is avoided. It used to be a little bit more common when they were sort of going for a little bit more of an opulent style. Now they do tend to avoid it because they're going for more freshness. So what do you think of this wine? In terms of, I really find that one of the things that I love about these wines, they're really good food wines. They're really, really lovely food wines. So,
but I think even more than just being a really great food wine, because I think Chardonnay is a great to pair with food. Sparkling wine is also structurally plays really well with food. But specifically, to me, what struck me drinking Franciacorta was that it really solved the problem, or was like the key pairing for all the most difficult foods to pair. So asparagus, usually like I saw, I was like, oh my god, I have to pair wine with asparagus. Like, how am I going to make either the wine not taste bad or the dish not taste bad? Artichokes, also like just enzymatically is really hard to pair. And we actually did have the opportunity to taste these wines with all these really traditionally difficult ingredients to pair, and it was excellent every single time. Also really versatile with like richer style, like hollandaise, eggy things. If we had some arancini right now, we'd just be popping those, because fried foods were really good. Even with meat, lighter meats, I just found it to be exceptionally versatile. But the thing that struck me the most was the traditionally difficult pairings. This tended to solve a lot of those problems. Yeah.
I'm curious, I probably most of it right there, to be honest with you, yeah. No, it's totally fine. But, you know, as our menu goes into the springtime, we start to have a little more challenging ingredients. We do have asparagus, both white and regular green asparagus, as well as artichoke marigold in our menu right now. I mean, we have the Mirabella, and it's just pairing perfectly with all of it, and it makes my life a lot easier. It's an easy go-to wine to recommend for by the glass or by the bottle. And who doesn't want their job to be slightly more easier, in terms of like finding a pairing for a guest. And so it's an easy go-to. It's something that you know is going to make your guests, by and large, very happy. Again, the quality is very high.
Just curious, are the customers really enjoying it as well? Or are you finding that they're coming back and asking for it?
So I think probably the major challenge of Franciacorta as a category that we've been talking about is getting people just kind of engaged in the first place. I think once you get them engaged and have them had it in the glass, they're very happy and they're very on board. But I think that that's kind of our jobs as sommeliers and people who are selling wines to kind of show these wines to people, and in the end it's about people happy. So.
It's a hand sell.
Yeah, for sure.
Not everyone even can say Franciacorta. They want to say Prosecco or Champagne, and that's super easy, and they're really well educated. Just at least in the, generally what they should think about those two categories. But when you have a song or someone in a wine store that is interested and passionate in these wines, you definitely can make guests happy. And they're like, oh, I'm trying something new.
Other than quality of the wines, Franciacorta, obviously, no argument there. But when you've got a customer who's looking to spend a certain amount of champagne level money at a wine list on a bottle of sparkling wine, what is, other than the novelty of trying something different, what's your selling proposition to that customer for spending that money on the Franciacorta instead of the champagne?
Thank you for that question. I was about to ask that question.
Well, I think in terms of the styles that you can get at the same price point, it's a little bit different. So I think you're getting vintage Franciacorta at the same price you're getting at root champagne. So it's kind of like, well, this has more age on it, has more prestige. It only happens every few vintages, and so it's a little bit more special. It's not just the introductory level of this house. It's one of the specialties of this house. And so I think it's kind of like changing the narrative of, it's unique, it's niche, and it's it's more has been put into it than the champagne, or whatever more expensive wines there are.
Yeah, I'll add that it's definitely the responsibility of the wine directors and the somms and the buyers and people who create lists to look for redundancies on their lists so that there aren't wines that are competing against each other in that way. So when I'm looking for a champagne, I'm looking for a champagne that doesn't necessarily compete with Franciacorta, Tranquilloc, something. When I'm looking for a Franciacorta, I'm looking for a Franciacorta that doesn't necessarily compete with so on and so on. And that's like a check against everything that I'm doing, so that when these questions arise, there are clear, definitive reasons why you would want to go one way or the other. And if it's on the list, it's on the list. It's there for a reason. But Jonathan's 100% correct. There really is, if you're looking to spend $400 or $500 on a sparkling wine, there really aren't a lot of Franciacorta options. So Franciacorta isn't really competing in that end of the market. Franciacorta on the higher end easily competes both in price-wise with a lot of non-vintage champagne. So when you start to get between those two, that is exactly the reason. And it's not like you should do this instead of the other, but yes, you're getting a vintage product, you're getting the highest expression of an estate or of a house as opposed to the lowest expression of an estate or a house. And that could be, I'm not saying that as a good thing or a bad thing, but those are just the logistics behind the wines that maybe and then it's also the guest willingness and the trust on us that they're used to, let's say, they're used to something and they know what they're going to get. They have to trust that we are recommending something in lieu of that, right? And I have to be able to stand behind these wines. I have to be able to say, no, I think you're going to like this. If you don't like it, I'll pop the other one. I'll do this. I'll do that. But it kind of takes a little bit on the person who's ultimately the last person to sell that wine before a guest drinks it or sells it in.
I'm just going to interrupt. I love what you were saying, that when you're buying the top of a house here, you're really competing with sort of almost an entry-level price point of a lot of champagnes, but you are getting really, really amazing quality. The conversation isn't so much about replace all your champagne on your list with Franciacorta. The conversation is more that it does bring something different to the table, and you don't want redundancy. Putting that out there, because sure, it maybe takes a little bit more time for you to explain to your customer at that table what it is, but think of the equity that you're sort of building with them and the trust, and it is about trust. When somebody comes into a restaurant, every one of these people works really hard to curate their list. They're not just going in there going, this is good, I like this. They're really thinking hard, and they're working very hard in picking wines that they can believe in, that they can stand behind, that they think offer something unique and interesting.
It's a matter of marketing.
Sure.
As far as media is concerned, I think you have to attract people emotionally. I mean, you're talking about, the acidity and the sugar. People really don't care about that. They care about emotions. I think an advertisement on TV or on the radio that says Franciacorta is better than champagne because Italians are more romantic and the bubbles last longer.
And then the lawsuits will begin.
You just get the name out there. I think once you do that, people are attracted to emotional things. So.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I agree exactly what you say in that regard, and I think it's important. One of the other takeaways that I had from this was that when you go someplace, it stays with you. And over the years, we've had in our restaurant, I remember we were pouring, we would have San Gimignano on the list, okay? We had San Gimignano on the list, and 12 years ago, we had San Gimignano on the list, and no one could pronounce Gimignano. Okay? No one could spell Gimignano, but you can't pronounce Gimignano, okay? And in the last 5 years, it is probably the #1 place that I have where I'm at a table, and a guest on their own is like, oh, we were there, we should get this. We were there, we should get this, is a huge things. People stay connected. I stay connected to the Tokais I drank in 2005. I've been doing that in wine, and I still have this romantic connection to it. I think that one of the best ways to, traveling, being open to traveling, visiting, going to Lake Iseo, visiting Brescia, putting this on your list. When you go to Italy, when you make a commitment to go abroad and spend some vacation, to yes, go to Florence and yes, go to Milan, but maybe go to the countryside as well. Really just explore what they have. I think people awaken a little bit. And it's not just Franciacorta, this is kind of for everywhere, but people tend to be awakened a little more to the ideas of what's out there, simply by being exposed to it, and when you're exposed to it in its place, it's very transformative. And so marketing is one thing, I think, but marketing the place is equally important as to marketing the product.
There's the Italian lifestyle, I think that all plays into it, and point well made for sure. We're turning it over to a consumer event this evening, and to your point, the entire setup is going to be different outside because we have a totally different audience, right? So when we're talking to you, we are talking as the trade. We're talking about acidity and price point and where does it fit on a wine list and all of that. Obviously, none of these are messages we will be talking to consumers about. Then we'll be talking about, Italian lifestyle and love of la dolce vita. 4 wines in front of us. I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to taste them. And that we can just talk a little bit about the wines. What was your question?
Yeah.
Was it a quick one?
Yes. Why are the wineries willing to take the risk of charging even better quality, charging more money, and still being in the game? Why are they doing that?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch
Okay.
that.
Why are the wineries that are making these wines willing to take the risk of charging more money, giving more quality, and still be in the game? Well, you can get it for second less money or something else. Why are they willing?
They believe in their wines. And it's truly what they're putting into it is.
I give them a lot of credit. I'm not taking away from that.
Yeah. And I think in terms of where you place yourself in the market, I don't think it's a good idea to devalue yourself because it would be hard to then come up from
Absolutely.
I think that they're saying this is our fair market. That's when we're putting it out, and we're not going to budge. And I had the same exact question going to Franciacorta. As a buyer, it would sometimes be hard to say, well, this is kind of expensive, but when I went there and really looking at what the regulations are, how much time they put into it, how small it is, and the high quality that they're kind of not, what's the word I'm looking for?
There's no mass production.
Yeah.
Right? These are all...
They're not making any compromise.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think they're just, and I think that's what those graphs show in that small, steady growth. I feel like I left Franciacorta thinking like, okay, I kind of understand it. And they're just taking those small steps. And I do think that that's, you know, a lot of, I don't want to say millennials, but I guess are into like authenticity and, you know, the story and where do things come from. And I do feel like Franciacorta has that story. Especially, we didn't talk about the yerba mate, but the fact that they're being really, they're thinking ahead. Like yerba mate is so old that it's new. You know, it's a grape from the region, and they're kind of looking at, well, what do we have in our toolbox right now that we can address climate change in our own small little.
That's a big expansion.
Yeah,
now that you're saying, oh, you buy.
And I think in the long run, they would hurt themselves by undercutting themselves financially in the market. So I think that this like slow and steady wins the race is the right way.
Thank you for answering.
Did everybody taste the wines? Or did you taste them? So wine number 3 is a rosé from a winery called Conta di Castaldi. And that's a winery, it's owned by the same people that own Bella Vista. One of the iconic wineries of that region is Bella Vista, and this is their second wine. Their whole strategy for this wine, because you did talk about millennials, is to sort of have appeal to younger people. It's meant to be a more fruity, more easy wine. It's also at a more affordable price point. So I found a lot of people do when they're pouring a wine. And you know, whether we like it or not, rosé is a very seasonal pour. This has been done quite well, and probably because it is at a more affordable price point, entry point. But I think it's also a really good sort of a calling card, if you will. I find it to be a very fruity wine, a very enjoyable wine. Maybe not the most complex, but certainly sort of a very enjoyable, fresh wine style that I think is very contemporary. So I sorry, just 1 second. So, you know, in terms of wholesale pricing, you know, this thing comes under $20. So it's, you know, these are wines that you can actually introduce on a list and not feel like it's a tremendous commitment. Did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the attributes of this wine. Being importers and distributors, we do face all these hurdles.
Sure.
You
face the toughest hurdles.
Yes. Storytelling, the value proposition, the value for the price proposition. Yep. Is sustainability or respect for the environment versus champagne made in the same method, is there a vast difference, and can we use that as a selling point?
65% is either certified organic or will be in the next 2 years.
For Franciacorta.
For Franciacorta, 65%. I have never seen that number anywhere. So again, sort of what we're talking about, 90% is state produced, 65% organic. That is a completely different playing field. The biggest producer in Franciacorta right now is a winery called BERLUCCHI, and they produce under 5 million bottles. Okay, the rest, then the two other sort of the more ones that we're more familiar here with, Bella Vista and Calle Bosco, they're both about 1.2 million bottles, and then the vast majority are in the 100,000 bottles. That's not a lot. I mean, it may sound like a lot, it's not a lot. So you don't have these vast economies of scale. So all of this costs money, right? But sustainability is absolutely a thing. Were you in the seminar this morning?
No.
You weren't. Okay. So it's a big push. There's a big push for organics. There's a big push for sustainability in general. They have a carbon monitoring system to see how much carbon each vineyard emits. There's very stringent regulation about what you can spray where, when, and nothing close to schools or churches or centers. I mean, a big part of it is also that a lot of people who are making wine in Franciacorta came to the region because they love that region and they summer there and they're, so they're there, they're living there, their families are there, and they don't want to duplicate it. Bella Vista is a beautiful view, right? I mean, so and a lot of them bought these properties and then started to make wine because they loved the area. So there's a big part of a big impetus to protect what they love about that area, and then understanding that if you are spraying tons of chemicals into the land here, we are killing it.
It's very green over there. It's rare that we saw vineyards where there was like brown dirt in between the rows. Every vineyard we visited was herbs, lettuces. It was spring. It was white flowers all in between the rows. And so this is
a lot of stuff is going. It's a very big part, and this is very much promoted by the consortium. Even more so by Mr. Brescia, who was the president. He was the first to get an organically certified winery. I don't know if you've seen, he was the first one. So he's the head of the consortium right now. So he's really behind a lot of these movements towards sustainability, organic, research. I mean, he's great. He's got tons of information. If you really want to geek out, get him in a corner and ask him every question you have.
We were lucky enough to visit there last year, and we met with 5 wineries or 4 wineries, and a lot of them were focusing on the sustainability, but I wasn't sure, having been to the Champagne region, whether they were just as sustainable, but I don't.
No. That should be your advertising point, right?
It's one of the stronger points of where there's a lot of cohesion within the whole region. Because when you can kind of, in general, say that more than half of the winemakers are pursuing organic, and some are I think the last slide you showed, they weren't going to be certified, but they were like, let's just have a practice.
What about biodynamic?
There's one winery that is certified biodynamic. A lot of them are practicing, but not necessarily not certified.
That should be your
biodynamic.
Biodynamics and sparkling is still very few.
It's very rare. I'm happy to guys. I just want to mention that we are a little over time, and I'm fine because I love this conversation. But it's 2:40, so if anybody has a place to go, we won't be offended. We're hanging out. We barely even talked about the wines, but this is kind of what I really like, because that's why I'm so thrilled that they're all here, and you can have these conversations with them.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I'm also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoyt-Budd. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed our podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher to help others find me more easily. Until next week, Sláinte!